Welcome to the Creative Director Series, a new dimension in teaching, thinking, practicing, and playing an instrument. I would like to share with you the many instructional and rehearsal techniques that will foster your students' musical growth, along with the many components that surround the beauty of musical expression. Prominent conductors and teachers throughout the United States, Canada, and Australia have endorsed the series as being an innovative approach that transforms ordinary bands into extraordinary bands. These techniques are supported by extensive research and are based on my 50 years of experience as a professional musician, conductor, and educator. The techniques have been field tested in my own program, guest conducting with students ranging from ages 10 to 70, and by countless other band directors who have tried the techniques themselves and who have enthusiastically endorsed the system of musical learning. The success of an ensemble stems from a fundamental concept: teaching students to make quality musical decisions. The quality of their musical decisions is the primary determining factor in the quality of an ensemble's performance. Our rehearsal and instructional techniques must be presented in a way that holds students responsible for their musical product. When a director attempts to make the decisions for an ensemble, students become passive and conditioned into waiting to be told what to do. The graphic illustrates a global view of alternative rehearsal techniques. The foundation is based upon the circle of fourths found in the center of the illustration. All musical elements in a warm-up or lesson setting evolve from this central point or row of pitches. You are free to move in any direction starting from the circle of fourths. The literature demands dictate the selection of musical elements as a warm-up exercise for a rehearsal. This may include articulation, rhythm patterns, chord qualities, listening, intonation, to name a few. The circle of fourths ties all the important elements together. Before I move on to the various techniques and concepts, I would like to share 3 very important quotes that play a significant role in the design of a rehearsal or lesson program. As we began our music studies many years ago, repetition played an important part in our daily practice routine. Notable music philosopher James Mersal states, "The objection to purely routine and mindless technical practice is that it is divorced from intelligence and from musical values. Such practice multiplies difficulties because there is no overall guiding control to shape up the action." One of my favorite quotes is by scholar and author Mortimer Adler. He states that the primary cause of all learning is the activity of the student's mind. The best that the best teacher can do is to assist that activity. And finally, W. Edwards Deming wrote in his best-selling text, Total Quality Management, "In any system operating at sub-level, 85% or more of the reasons for failure can be traced to the way the instructional process is set up." Once you contemplate these prominent quotes, your instructional techniques will be elevated for improved student achievement. A top priority for our rehearsals is in how we develop and establish internal ensemble pulse. This is where all entrance errors occur, along with poor clarity and definition with rhythm patterns and articulation, to name a few. A very important term needs to enter our rehearsal vocabulary. It is entrainment. Entrainment is evident in small ensembles, such as trios, quartets, or quintets. They are so rhythmically entrained that conductors are not required. A principal player simply gives a preparatory beat, and the music begins to flow, moving smoothly through transitions, tempo changes, phrasing, dynamics, and a myriad of musical possibilities. What is most intriguing for many non-musicians is that this type of small ensemble has an invisible communication system that connects the minds of its players. As musicians, we are very sensitive to this invisible communication system as we strive to accomplish this through our rehearsals. Entrainment is seldom spoken about in our musical training institutions, nor is it addressed through rehearsal techniques. I can vividly recall my early years as my friends and I would freely improvise two-part inventions, or if there were 3 or 4 of us, we would improvise trios and quartets. This was a wonderful example of musical entrainment. We were so immersed in what we were creating, we could spontaneously respond to every subtle nuance and inflection of the other player. It was much like having one mind that made beautiful music. Another example of entrainment is that of a jazz quartet, quintet, or other. Establishing entrainment in our ensemble begins with aligning internal pulse. By unifying the thoughtful energy of the conductor with that of the ensemble is the most effective way of extending and infusing concentration within the entire ensemble. This graphic illustrates several players with poor internal ensemble pulse. The metronomes indicate the slight variations of tempo and pulse within each individual. The ruler of time illustrates the slight imperfections that occur before, on, or after the beat or pulse. The musical results are poor entrances, releases, and rhythmic imperfection. The performance lacks clarity and definition. This becomes apparent when percussionists are used to establish a pulse or beat or an electronic metronome while insisting students follow this percussive beat. Thus enters the world of repetition in attempts to align pulse and reaction time to notation. I can assure you this does not solve the problem. This graphic simply identifies where precision and accuracy lies. Once the ensemble's internal metronomes are synchronized, rhythmic precision is in place, thus reducing time consumed with unproductive repetition. As you can see, the metronomes do not indicate any variation in tempo or pulse within each individual. The ruler of time illustrates musical precision. The musical results are flawless entrances, releases, and rhythmic precision. Instructional techniques must focus on the accuracy of the internally perceived and experienced pulse. How do we go about aligning the timed thought processes so that everyone precisely perceives the musical expectation together as one person and not varied individuals throughout the group? I introduce a very simple exercise that immediately makes an important connection with tempo and pulse by encouraging your musicians to think in time. This is a process that creates musical precision through entrainment. It teaches the student about metacognition, to be aware of their thinking as they perform specific tasks, and then use this awareness to control what they are doing. The first step is to have the students count out loud from 1 to 8 at a slow tempo, approximately 1 beat per second, or a quarter equals 52 to 62 beats per minute. As they count, ask them to listen for the silence between beats or numbers. The space of silence must be consistent. This is critical because when an ensemble rushes or slows down, it is not that they are not following the conductor, it is the space of silence between beats which are changing. If the ensemble begins to rush, the space of silence is becoming smaller. If the ensemble begins to slow down, the space of silence is becoming larger. Simply making the students aware of the silence between beats immediately changes their perception of timekeeping. As you begin developing an internal pulse with your ensemble, do not use a metronome, snare drum, or other. You will notice that the counting is from 1 to 8 and not 2, 3, or 4 beats. This is an important change in perception and breaks the habit of counting in 2/4, 3/4, or 4/4 time. Counting from 1 to 4 restricts cognition to one measure at a time and not the duration of the entire exercise. If the exercise is 8 measures long with 4 beats per measure, we need teaching methods to develop and sustain time thinking for 32 seconds, 4 times 8, and not 4 seconds per measure. Counting from 1 to 8 extends the mind of the student into the duration of 2 measures and not 1. After they have counted from 1 to 8 at least 3 or 4 times in a consistent pulse, ask them to count from 1 to 8, and this time hold your hands outstretched with palms up. Inform the students that they are to count aloud when your palms are up and silently count when you turn your palms down. Do this several times, as this is an essential component of this exercise. It requires every student to concentrate and maintain a consistent beat or pulse. Hold your palms down for 4 to 5 silent counts, and then turn your palms up and listen for the accuracy and clarity when the students count aloud. The silent counts happen randomly. You can turn your palms down on counts 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8. The objective is to exercise accurately timed thinking and responding. Moreover, you have 100% of the students on task, thinking alike in tempo. You have complete control of their time thinking process by developing the discipline of duration. Aligning internal ensemble pulse is an excellent process by which to address a mind-body connection. For many years we have read and heard about the mind-body connection that occurs in playing an instrument. This exercise develops a physical response to notes and rhythm patterns by connecting the notation to the student's mind and training them to respond to a particular beat. Before proceeding with the exercises, first have the students count from 1 to 8 again. Turn palms down and up to review the time-focused concentration through silence. Now, after you've done this, instruct the students to clap on beats 2, 5, 6, and 8. We're connecting the mind to the body, training it to dictate a hand clap on a specific count. After the students clap the exercise, show them the musical example that follows this particular slide. Please note that counting is not 2 measures of 4 beats to a bar. Counting to 8 is important as the exercise is shaping time concentration to 8 seconds. Next, repeat the counting and have students clap on beats 3, 5, and 8. Again, show them the exercise that follows this slide. And third, instruct students to clap on the and of 2, beat 5, and the and of 7. We're getting more complicated now. And so the last step would be to instruct the students to clap on the E and of 2 and of 3 and beat 6. This is more complicated and requires mental and physical coordination. This illustration gives you an idea of exercising a mind-body connection so important when playing an instrument. Create your own rhythm exercises to elevate this very important awareness for reaction and response. Show the students that if their mind is not connected to the silence or rests, what follows will always be an error. The rests must be active through the time-thinking process in order to create the notated rhythm pattern. This is a musical illustration of the previous 5 exercises we used in making a mind-body connection, which is necessary when playing an instrument. Be sure to share these musical examples with your students. This illustration is what I refer to as the discipline of duration. The various number combinations illustrated develop a timed mental response necessary for note entrance, duration, and release. The discipline of duration is also connected with the ruler of time concept, which I will discuss later. As you can see, the bar lines are removed. Without bar lines, students are disciplined to the total number of beats and the ability to adhere to any note duration, similar to the counting from 1 to 8 used in developing internal ensemble pulse. It is less confusing for the student to process counting from 1 through 4, 5, 6, 7, and so forth, rather than the conventional method of 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. and so forth. Once counting through to the exact length of the note is in place, students find it much easier to return to regular musical notation with bar lines and connect the correct value and length of a note or tied notes. No longer is it a mystery of when and where to release a note. The duration exercises provide opportunities for students to make musical quality decisions while sustaining a pitch and determining balance, blend, intonation within the total band sound. The removal of notation contributes significantly to tonal control by focusing listening to the sound and not being consumed with notation. The discipline of duration develops physical and mental endurance with embouchure and breath support. The timed internal counting process provides teaching points that specifically refer to the exact count of any imperfection within the extended duration. It eliminates harmonic imbalance at the end of phrases or sustained chords. The circle of fourths is the source for the entire alternative rehearsal techniques system. It assures a connection with all musical elements and in context with scales and harmonic progressions. Using the Circle of Fourths worksheet provides unlimited opportunities to explore chord qualities, balance, blend, intonation, articulation, rhythm patterns, major, minor, chromatic, or any other scale form. By following the root sequences shown on the chart, it is possible to exercise all the important musical skills in all keys and not just a few flat keys. An exercise designed to move through the circle provides students with an authentic music-making experience, similar to the harmonic demands of all band literature. By teaching students using the Circle of Fourths, you will develop their command of all keys. I cannot impress enough the importance of scale and key knowledge. I believe that the lack of scale knowledge is at the heart of two fundamental problems found among young instrumentalists, and they are poor sight reading and intonation. A musician's mind must respond spontaneously in all keys. To acquaint students with the row of pitches, simply have them play the letter pitches, starting with their assigned transposed pitch, and continue through the row as outlined below. Students should be instructed to play notes in the middle range of their instruments. Notice the numbers above and below the letters. They are extremely important in teaching scale, order, and key relationships. The top number indicates the number of flats or sharps in that particular key or scale. The bottom number indicates the correct order of flats or sharps. The letters in parentheses also show enharmonic equivalents. Read the flat scales and accidentals from left to right, and sharp scales and accidentals from right to left. You may have noticed that I removed the notation from the Circle of Fourths sheet. By removing notation, the student immediately connects with pitch names and not notation. Without fail, this simple change elevates thinking and response, and removing notation expands and exercises listening skills. We now can focus listening and playing toward all performance fundamentals such as tone quality, balance, blend, intonation, articulation, dynamics, key tonality, melodic line and harmonic color, or rhythm patterns. Another important awareness is that notation does not guarantee any control over concentration, thinking, or focused retention throughout an entire exercise or composition. Without notation, students become active participants in making musical decisions with ensemble tone quality and performance. Too often, students wait to be told what to do by their director, and without notation, they decide what to do themselves. Your band will progress significantly if you remove notation from your warm-up process. This places listening as the priority, and there's no better way to elevate listening skills. The letter symbol is the foundation for developing a spontaneous reaction to all scales and keys. This circle of fourths sheet is the one I suggest you use with your ensemble. Notice that I divided the ensemble into groups numbered according to the part a student is playing in band. You may need to change some of the group assignments to better meet the needs of your instrumentation. The group numbers correspond with SATB voicing. The top priority is to have the lowest pitched instrument assigned to Group 4 as the foundation for ensemble tonal sonority. The next important pitch assignment is found in Group 3, as this group uses the fifth of the chord, the next most important partial above the fundamental played by Group 4. The grouping assignments provide many options to explore all chord qualities in all keys. Allowing students to hear a complete palette of chord colors will significantly improve your ensemble's intonation and sonority. A major chord would be grouped in the following manner. Group 1 would begin their pitch sequence on B-flat concert. Group 2 begins on D concert, Group 3 on F concert, and Group 4 on B-flat concert. As students then follow the pitch sequence, they will play every major chord as an ensemble. With chord qualities in place, you can use the exercises to address ensemble, balance, blend, intonation, dynamic levels, crescendos, decrescendos, to name a few of the variations. Using the circle of fourth sheets, the students will always play through various harmonic progressions and keys, not only one key, but all keys. The next slide presentation will illustrate chord qualities in all keys. The following group voicings provide your ensemble with an important foundation for understanding and hearing basic chord qualities in all keys. The chord qualities include major, minor, dominant, and diminished chords. The chord qualities should be played without written notation. And most important, the emphasis is placed upon listening. Students must hear basic chord qualities before attempting any type of theoretical reasoning. The chords should be played throughout the entire circle of fourths. Listening exposure to all chord qualities in all keys is a top priority for musical excellence. You will determine the variations for this important warm-up exercise, and variations can include various number durations, rhythm patterns, and dynamics. The controlled counting exercises we used for developing internal pulse, counting from 1 to 8, provides an important connection for dynamic performance. This time thinking for internal pulse provides specific numbers within any dynamic range, eliminating most dynamic contrast problems. Students will immediately hear the results when all sections respond with dynamic equality. The internalized counting in forward order controls volume expansion of crescendo, and in reverse order, controlling decrescendo. This technique serves a dual purpose by emphasizing unified internal pulse while focusing attention to dynamic sound related to number values. The numbers provide reference points and a means to communicate variations of volume. The lesser the number, the lesser the volume. The greater the number, the greater the volume. Therefore, assign 1 as a dynamic level of pianissimo, or any soft dynamic, and a 5, 7, 9, or 11 number assigned a forte, or any loud level. This concept establishes an understandable system for responding to dynamic change and provides a connection between volume, balance, and blend. The priority is to have students hear a balanced, blended crescendo and decrescendo. Once they establish this oral precision of expanded and contracted sound, they immediately respond to the dynamic markings without the director reminding them about what is written. This eliminates rehearsing dynamics for every piece of literature. An interesting approach to ensemble dynamic control is what I refer to as color shifts. The dynamic color shifts are a result of the many combinations of dynamics found in Percy Grainger's compositions. Simply assign the brass choir a 5-count crescendo decrescendo combination and the woodwind choir a 5-count decrescendo crescendo combination. This assignment allows the students to hear a color or choir sound shift when everyone arrives at count 3 while playing the assigned number combinations. The exercise is a means for developing woodwind and brass choir independence and eliminates woodwinds who quite often follow the dynamics of the brass section. The following 3 slides illustrate other dynamic variations. The following illustrated dynamic variations are what I refer to as being a burst of sound. While working on W. Francis Macbeth's well-known composition, They Hung Their Harps in the Willows, I was prompted to write an exercise that eliminates a great deal of rehearsal time. In the opening measures, Macbeth writes a dynamic marked pianissimo to fortissimo in the space of 1 beat. I refer to this as being a sudden burst of sound. The difficulty lies in developing a consistent reaction from all players. The only way this will happen is to have the students first speak the dynamic and feel the physical response to such a 1-beat expansion of sound. In example 3, disregard the beat numbers and rehearse by having the students speak the following. Beats 1 and 2 are spoken at a piano level. The and after beat 2 will be spoken at a forte level, and beat 5 is spoken at a fortissimo level, followed by decrescendo on beats 4, 3, 2, and 1. When the students speak the volume changes as outlined, have students do the same process internalized with their instruments. Knowledge and performance of all scales, major, minor, and chromatic, should be a high priority for all student musicians and directors. I coined the term Grandmaster Scale, which eliminates the single scale performance approach. When students play the Grandmaster Scale, they play all major or minor scales in a designated rhythm pattern as a single exercise. This may require breaking some old scale habits. I realized that playing the conventional 1 scale at a time did very little in shaping a musical mind that responds spontaneously to all keys. The Grandmaster Scale makes important connections with all literature demands by playing in all keys and not just a limited few. Simply stated, we provide students with an expressway that leads to the mastery of technical skills with no speed limits or curves to slow the process. My daily warm-up included some form of scale, chord, or rhythm pattern connected to the literature being rehearsed. This daily musical occurrence continually reinforced technique development, harmonic understanding, and listening. I quickly learned that the Grandmaster Scale was the single most important connecting link for all music performance skills and theory. No longer was it necessary to select literature based upon individual or section weaknesses. The Grandmaster Scale is an important component in building a performance vocabulary with unlimited variations for your daily rehearsal warm-up process. The Grandmaster Scale also provides a logical, sequential approach for all forms of minor scales and chromatics. As you can see illustrated on this graphic, I list the reasons for considering this instructional process for scales. The following slide illustrates the Grandmaster Scale. The example illustrates a conventional pattern for the Grandmaster Scale. The asterisk at the last whole note of each scale is where you prompt students to think and prepare for the next key. This is the first step in exercising the musician's mind to respond spontaneously to any key. Our conventional approach has students playing one scale at a time. The problem with holding the last note of every scale is that the student's mind no longer thinks of anything beyond that last note, or the mind becomes inactive. A word of caution: do not play the same scale pattern for each rehearsal. Scales played in unison and octaves using the same rhythm pattern become extremely boring for students. Change sound colors by having the brass choir begin their scales on B-flat concert and the woodwind choir begins on F concert. This simple change creates two scales being played simultaneously in the interval of a fifth. Another variation would be having groups 1 and 4 begin their scales on B-flat concert, group 3 begins on F concert, and group 2 on D concert. This assignment has students playing 3 scales simultaneously. The students enjoy this departure from the many conventional patterns in unisons and octaves. The next 3 slides illustrate some interesting scale variations. The variations break old scale habits that so easily became a part of our daily routines. Basically, there are 5 variations. The first being the conventional scale approach of ascending and descending. Second, ascend only. Third, descend only. Fourth, ascend the first scale and descend the next scale. And lastly, descend the first scale and ascend the next scale. I suggest you change the variations for each rehearsal. This will certainly eliminate any boredom with scales and truly complement your ensemble's technical skills. In addition to the 5 basic variations, there are 2 additional exercises with chromatics. Usually a chromatic scale is practiced as a single exercise. Combining major scale and chromatic combinations is a top priority for exercising a spontaneous reaction to keys and accidentals when reading notation. The first combination is ascend the major scale and descend the chromatic scale. The second is ascend the chromatic scale and descend the major scale. Also include scales in mixed meter as illustrated. Compressing key tonality simply means reducing the number of beats or measures played in any given key. The goal is to create a spontaneous mental reaction and response to all keys. As you can see in the first exercise, the last note of the scale is a half note. The student only has 2 beats to prepare for the next key. Exercises 2 and 3, I reduce the duration of the last scale note to 1 beat. Exercise 4, the duration is reduced to a half a beat. Exercises 5 and 6 are when we arrive at a spontaneous response for the next key. The important part of playing scales in this manner is to exercise thinking coupled with an immediate response to various keys and without written notation. It is the student's musical mind that we are exercising and developing. A spontaneous response to all scales is also an important skill necessary for improvisation. Continuing with compressing key tonality, I introduce several important exercises based on digital patterns in all keys. With the previous exercises, a student is now ready to expand their musical mind by responding to scale patterns based on pitch numbers that leads to triads and chords. If you have a jazz ensemble, the scale exercises and digital patterns will certainly remove the mystery of improvisation. Exercises 1 through 7 are based on a logical sequence leading to a major chord. You will find many more patterns in Student Supplement Books 1 and 2. This slide illustrates several rehearsal options when using the circle of fourths. Scales are not often rehearsed in mixed meter. As you can see in exercise 4, I use major chord grouping assignments with rhythm patterns for groups 2, 3, and 4. The various scale combinations create a high level of interest with students. It is important to rehearse such combinations without written notation, because our priority is to shape the student's musical mind and to apply what they have learned with the literature being rehearsed. Articulation is a performance fundamental that requires considerable practice. The method of articulation with ensembles frequently becomes heavy and over-articulated, which distorts ensemble tone quality. When practicing the following 5 articulation examples throughout all keys, we'll certainly develop a lightness and finesse that is consistent within the entire ensemble. Too often, a rehearsal begins with articulated scales. If there is a variation, most likely it will be the slur-to, tongue-to example, which is perhaps the easiest to articulate. I suggest you vary articulation exercises by using examples 3, 4, and 5. Stress the need for lightness and finesse, and don't hit notes. This is what distorts tone quality. This is a very important illustration when teaching students scales. Knowing and playing all scales is the foundation for a student's performance vocabulary. Without this skill, students are technically restricted. This graphic suggests a learning process for scale mastery that is based on a natural learning process. It is different and departs from the conventional approaches we have used for years. I can assure you that early scale performance problems are eliminated when this learning process is introduced. This 4-step process is applied to all scales. Simply have students recite the musical alphabet ascending from A to G, and then have them recite the alphabet ascending and descending, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, G, F, E, D, C, B, A. Once they are comfortable with reciting the musical alphabet forward and backward, recite the musical alphabet starting on a random letter of the alphabet, such as C, B, D, and so forth. This scale alphabet is recited without any sharp or flat accidentals. Now follow this recitation with the scale alphabet with accidentals, such as B flat, B flat, C, D, E flat, F, G, A, B flat, A, G, F, E flat, D, C, B flat. Don't be alarmed if a student hesitates when reciting the letters in reverse. This is only temporary because traditionally students have been trained to play scales by memorizing musical notation without application of the musical alphabet. This approach neglects the basic understanding of note names and their order to achieve scale mastery. Once students are comfortable reciting their first scale alphabet, forward and reverse with accidentals, apply the following outlined 4-step process with instruments. Step 1 is the recitation process necessary in making a mental connection for intelligent application of new knowledge. Step 2 employs the recitation process, the intelligent application of knowledge, while dictating note accuracy to the fingers. Combining recitation and telling the fingers what to do establishes the important mind-body connection that leads to error-free scale performance. Step 3 expands the process in making an auditory connection. The mind silently recites and dictates to the fingers while playing the instrument. This action creates an auditory connection that hears the scale error-free. And step 4 is the final step for connecting the mind, fingers, ears, and eyes to the written notation. This final event solidifies learning connections for retention and recall with band literature. This simple process is applied to all new scales. Within one school year, your entire band will be playing all scales without error. Their basic performance vocabulary will be established and ready to be expanded as outlined in the many examples of the Grand Master Scale. To stress the importance of accurate pulse and the mind functioning in time and tempo, I introduced the ruler of time. This is perhaps the most significant graphic to base the accuracy and precision of note values and the division of beats with all rhythm patterns. By using a traditional measuring device, a ruler or yardstick, or music staff without bar lines, students immediately create an awareness and understanding for the precise division of space and the placement or arrival of notes within this space. The image provides a mental boundary for exactness with time and rhythm patterns, or a picture is worth 1,000 words. The division and subdivision of space must be mentally synchronized through internal pulse for rhythmic accuracy within the entire ensemble. When teaching eighth notes, some of our conventional procedures do not specify the exact placement of the up or and of a beat. This is a major error that enters the student's performance foundation. Moreover, the foot tap is not an accurate timekeeper. Most problems dealing with note duration and rhythm patterns can be attributed to the inconsistency of silence between beats. To better perceive silence before and after the beat, the ruler of time accurately represents the measurement of silence, or the invisible space between pulse and beats. The early priority should not only be to see the down and up beat diagrammed on the page, but how the upbeat feels when accurately placed at a specific point of arrival. It is more than a foot tap being in the up position. I must emphasize again, the word up does not define any specific point of arrival like the word down. Specific arrival points are necessary if we anticipate any form of rhythmic accuracy. As you can see, the length and width of the ruler of time are determined by tempo. The slower the tempo, the longer and wider the space of subdivided silence. The faster the tempo, the shorter and narrower the space of subdivided silence. The lower and upper horizontal lines represent the down and up beat, or the arrival points. The three horizontal lines between the lower and upper horizontal lines represent 16th and 32nd note subdivision. Unfortunately, the teaching of pulse and time has relied on the division of beats through foot tapping or other means. When a metronome is used, conventional techniques do not address or alert students to focus on the accuracy of silence space between the beats of the metronome. Students learn to follow the beat instead of internalizing the pulse. Consequently, the musical results often contribute to tempos that are either rushed or slowed down in an effort to follow the beat. When presenting the ruler of time, demonstrate tempo variations by holding a pencil in a horizontal position above the top edge of the music stand. The top edge of your music stand represents the downbeat or bottom horizontal line, and the pencil represents the upbeat or upper horizontal line. The space between these two lines represents the silence between the beat, in which time and thought must travel or move through. This is where many instructional approaches create problems. We do not teach that time must travel through space. Space controls tempo. Larger space between beats produces a slower tempo, and the smaller space between beats produces a faster tempo. This illustration represents silence and its subdivision when tempo increases or decreases. The space in its division increases or decreases proportionately to assure rhythmic accuracy and clarity. The students create an image of this measurement and respond accordingly. The image provides a mental boundary for the existence of time and rhythm. The following 4 slides illustrate the placement of notes and rhythm patterns on the ruler of time. I suggest when a student has a problem with a rhythm, place the pattern on the ruler of time. By placing rhythm patterns on the ruler of time, your students become sensitive and aware of the precise space between notes and note values. No longer is the placement of "and" or the upbeat a mystery. This graphic illustrates the placement or spacing of notes on the "and" of the beat in relation to the downbeat. Here we have 16th notes illustrated precisely between beats. The appearance and notation of a rhythm pattern has an effect upon its interpretation and performance. Visually, patterns can create different meanings for the musician when interpreting rhythmic flow and direction. A rhythm pattern is sound moving through time in a forward direction. The best example is the interpretation of a dotted 8th and 16th note. I use the word "today" to clarify this rhythmic problem. Too often, rehearsal techniques spend considerable amounts of time addressing this pattern by teaching 3 tied notes followed by 1/16th, which is much like speaking "day 2" rather than "today." This method lengthens the single 16th note, which becomes longer and longer. The rhythm becomes a compound pattern in 6/8 time. By thinking 3 tied 16ths followed by 1/16th note connects the last 16th to the tied 3 which have already happened. The brain does not think or function backwards. This is why conventional teaching of this pattern fails. By applying my simple concept of short looks for long, the 16th is no longer a part of the dotted 8th note. The dotted 8th note should be thought of as being connected to the short note that precedes it. Therefore, the 16th note becomes the important note that points to the dotted 8th, forward motion. This is much like saying "today" or "today." The 2 is a 16th and the day is the dotted 8th. When this concept is in place, the frequently heard lazy pattern of a quarter note and 8th note is removed and gives complete control over the length and placement of the 16th note. The long note is related to the short that came before. The long note is the point of repose. The length variation when speaking the syllable "to" determines the style and characteristic of the 16th note. Changing the length of the syllable "to" to "t" or "t" can shorten the 16th to a 32nd note. Practice the following examples so students realize the number of variations with their interpretation. The ensemble or section is to speak the word "today" several times to unify articulation. Follow this by playing the spoken word. In closing this presentation, I return to the global view of alternative rehearsal techniques. It was my only way of illustrating connected learning with all music fundamentals that are so critical for the success of a band program. A successful and worthy band program is based on the students' musical performance vocabulary. Their vocabulary provides the doorway to a wide variety of wind literature and masterworks. As you implement this program of musical learning, you will quickly experience the rapid growth of your band program. This system is a paradigm shift away from many conventional and traditional methods. I encourage you to implement any part of this system as you will experience positive musical results. Please contact me for any type of assistance, and I thank you for your interest in my publications.